Welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel for those of you who are watching for the first time. Today I'm going to be filming one of the final videos in my medical school application series, and this one is about secondary applications. So for those of you who aren't aware, medical schools will send you guys secondary applications after they've received your primary application, which is what you send through AMCAS or ACOMAS. And schools kind of handle this a little bit differently. Some schools will send this application out to all of their applicants, regardless of their admission statistics, and other medical schools will sort of screen their applicants and only send secondary essays to those who have these certain MCAT scores and GPA scores above their threshold. But honestly, schools are not that discriminatory about who they send secondaries to, and so you can kind of expect that at least most of your medical schools will end up sending you secondaries. And then in terms of timing, most of these secondaries will start coming out at the end of June, and then depending on when you actually submit your AMCAS or ACOMAS application, you could be receiving them all the way up until late September, I would say, sometimes early October. But if you're adhering to sort of the timeline that I set forth, and I actually have a video linked down below of when I recommend you do different things in the application process, you should be submitting your application in early June, which means you'll be getting the brunt of your secondary applications end of June, July, and beginning of August. And secondary applications, in my opinion, are the worst part of the medical school application process because they are so much work. You know, your personal statement was stressful because you had to make sure you crafted this perfect essay, but it also was just one essay. Secondary applications consist many essays that are sometimes really lengthy or sometimes really hard to come up with answers for, and the sheer number of things you're actually writing is pretty overwhelming. And so what I'm going to do now is give you guys some tips for how best to approach the secondaries when applying to medical school. And although it's still going to be overwhelming and you're still going to have quite a lot of work to do, hopefully these tips will help make your journey through a little clearer and a little more manageable. So let's start with tip number 1, which is stay organized. When these secondary applications start coming in, most of which are going to be emailed to you, you're going to be getting all these emails. It's going to be really easy to lose sight of which schools have sent you things, what things you've already sent back. And so my recommendation is set up some kind of calendar or spreadsheet where you can very clearly write, all right, this school sent me this secondary on this date. Here's the progress I've made. This is when I submitted it, etc., etc. That way you're not getting confused as to, okay, have I already done this? Has the school already sent this to me yet? Because the worst that would happen is a school sends you a secondary and you completely miss the email. You forget to actually fill that secondary application out, and then you basically eliminate your chances of getting into that school. And so a clear calendar is really helpful in avoiding that. Tip number 2 is sort of in line with what I've said in my past videos, which is try to submit things as soon as possible. I created a video about the med school timeline, and during that video, I talked in great detail about the importance of sending in application materials as soon as you can. And that still applies to this as well. I have had students who get secondary applications, let's say they get it at the beginning of July, and they're either taking a course through their college, let's say they're doing a summer internship, and they just end up not getting around to filling that secondary out until like the beginning of September. Having an 8-week turnaround for secondary applications is not ideal at all. I personally recommend that you give yourself at most like a week to fill out the secondary application for a school, because that is going to maximize your chances of having that application looked at and getting an interview invite as quickly as possible. And then tip number 3 is kind of in line with that, and that's allocate your time wisely. There are students who spend like, 10 minutes writing an essay for a secondary, and it sounds more like a text message to a friend than it does like a formal essay sent to a medical school that they actually want to go to. Then I've also had students who spend like 50 hours writing an essay, and that is just not very tenable throughout this process because you will get so burnt out if you're giving that much care and attention to each essay. And so I think there's a nice sweet spot between making sure what you're writing is a reflection of who you are, making sure there aren't grammatical errors, making sure it just sounds good, but without killing yourself over every single word you're writing. And so it's important to kind of find a way to balance that properly so you actually can get applications sent in and they're not just piling up as you take your sweet old time writing one essay. Tip number 4 is reuse essays whenever possible. If you wrote an essay about a challenge you overcame, and then another school sends you another question asking about a hardship you overcame, use that same essay. Don't think of another challenge or hardship. Don't think of another way to make it sound interesting. Don't think of a new ending and a new lesson you learned from that challenge. That's a waste of your time. Instead, try to keep an inventory of essays you've already written, and then if a question from a new school pops up and you're like, that essay would be a perfect fit for that new question, use it. Do not reinvent the wheel here. That's not gonna be the best use of your time at all. And then tip number 5 is similar, and that is use essay templates when possible. There are certain questions that every school asks, but that are unique to those schools. And I'm specifically thinking of the question, why do you want to go to our medical school? That is not an essay you can obviously reuse because hopefully your reasons for applying to medical school A are not the same for why you're applying to medical school B. And so you're gonna have to have some degree of personalization in those essays. But what you can have for those essays is a template. You can open each of those essays the same way, you can have a lot of the same body format, and you can close those essays the same way. And ideally, all you will need to do is replace the name of the medical school, and then replace your reasons for wanting to go to that medical school. The creativity and the structure and the flow of that template essay will really help to reduce the amount of time you're going to spend on answering those why do you want to go to this school questions. Tip number 6, don't repeat your personal statement. You have probably talked about something deeply personal and important to you in your personal statement, and it can be really tempting to bring that subject up again in secondary essays. However, try your best to avoid doing that, because the fact of the matter is that admissions officers will already have read your personal statement. And so instead of just rehashing and reiterating things you've already talked about, try to bring up new topics into the essays that you're writing for your secondary. And then that's very similar to tip 7, which is highlight unique aspects of yourself in your secondary application. Let's say in college, the 3 things you cared most about were addiction medicine research, prison tutoring, and playing volleyball on your college volleyball team. Now, if you've only talked about prison tutoring in your personal statement and haven't really had a chance to bring up the other 2 topics anywhere else in your application, except for the activity list, it's a great time now to use the secondary essays to really dive into those other 2 interests that you've been really passionate about and that you've pursued for quite a period of time. And so, think about the things that you've done that you really identify with, that you've been very successful with, and try your best to sneak as many of those into your secondary essays as possible. That way, the reader, the admissions officer, is going to really get a good sense of who you are and what you've accomplished. Tip number 8 is answer the question. I can't tell you how many times I have read essays that just don't really answer the question being asked. Whether the writer started to answer the question, then sort of veered onto this tangential topic, or they skirted around the question but never gave a direct answer, that is not great. One way to ensure that you're answering the questions properly is once you've written the essay, once it's in your Google Doc or Microsoft Word document, and you think it's all good to go, take the online highlighter and just highlight any part of the essay that responds directly to the question being asked. And if you wrote a 3-paragraph essay and you've highlighted 3 sentences in your whole essay, that means that you did not dedicate enough time in that essay to actually answering the question. Instead, the highlighting should take up a majority of your essay. Sure, you might have a beginning and an ending that doesn't obviously answer the question, but the body of that essay should all be highlighted and should all be a direct response to the question being asked. Tip number 9 is be unique and original. And this is a theme that kind of underlies the entire medical school application process. A lot of the questions asked are questions that you could either answer really generically or you could answer really uniquely and in a way that showcases your own individuality. And so let's say they're talking about a challenge that you faced in your life. Don't talk about the adjustment to college, because everybody had an adjustment to college, and that is something that is probably used over and over and over again in those kinds of questions. Instead, try to dig a little deeper and think, what other challenges have I faced that are really specific to me and that a lot of other people aren't going to be talking about in their application essays. This will make your essays a lot more interesting to read, because trust me, admissions officers don't like reading the same thing over and over again. And will also just really showcase who you are as a person and set you apart from your fellow applicants. Tip number 10 is put all of your essays in a separate document before submitting them. Don't just write your essays in the little online boxes that they give you for the secondary. Instead, open up a Google Doc, open up Microsoft Word, heck, open up a notebook if you like writing in paper and pencil, and write your essays in that separate document where you can revise them and edit them and save them, which is key, before actually adding them to the application online. If you just have them in the application online, you're going to submit that application and have no real chance of seeing those essays again. That will ultimately hurt you because, one, you won't be able to reference those if you end up interviewing at that school. And two, you're not going to be able to use those essays for other questions from other schools if you don't have access to them. And so having everything kept in a nice separate document is going to give you easiest access to those essays if you need to reuse them again, and will also let you reference them later on for interview purposes or for any other reason. My final tip is plan ahead. And I saved this one for last because I want to talk about it in a little more detail. So if you're on a strict timeline, you hopefully are submitting your primary application early in June. And mostly these secondaries won't start coming out until the end of June. This will then give you a fair number of weeks where you can either do nothing, which is definitely fine and what some people choose to do. I was the person who did nothing. Or if you'd like to, you can start preparing for your secondaries. And there are lots of different approaches to how to prepare for these secondaries. Some people will literally use last year's secondary essay prompts, copy and paste them into a document and just start answering all of them. I personally advise against that because I have seen too many times that students have done that and then the secondaries change, the prompts are different. And then they wasted all of that time and didn't really make any forward progress. Instead, there are a few things you can do if you do want to get a head start on things that are going to be necessary no matter what and are going to put you in an advantaged position. Number one, research thoroughly your schools that you have applied to. In every secondary application, at least one of the essay questions is going to be, why do you want to go to blank blank medical school? And when answering this question, you're going to need to have specific and detailed reasons about why that school is right for you. You're not going to want to say things like, because the community of people seems wonderful, or because I just love the city and I want to be able to help the people who live in the city. Oh God, there's nothing original or interesting about that. Instead, you need to be giving specific researchers that you'd like to do research with, perhaps specific courses that really appeal to you and are specific to that medical school, or perhaps clubs or programs that medical school offers that you can really see yourself being a part of. But in order to answer that question in such a detailed way, you're going to have to spend a fair amount of time researching that medical school and actually coming up with those answers. And that is something you can definitely spend the month of June doing. The second thing you can also do is come up with answers for commonly asked secondary questions. Things like, how can you contribute to the diversity or community of this medical school? Things like a challenge you face, as we talked about earlier, and how you've overcome that challenge. These are questions that are undoubtedly going to show up in your secondary applications. And so instead of pre-writing for questions that may or may not even exist, try to think of answers for questions that are almost certainly going to show up so that you're not making more work for yourself. And then if you finish those two things and you have a little time to spare, just take a break. Relax, get your mind off of writing for a few days, because once those secondaries actually start coming in, it's going to be a while before you have time to just take a break and unwind and decompress. And I wish you guys all the best of luck as you go through this process. It is daunting, and I don't want to make it seem like it's not, but I think if you follow the list of things that I suggested, it at least will be a clear path forward as you knock out those different essays, as you cross things off your list, and ultimately as you end up completing the process of secondaries. And so if you guys have any questions about filling out secondary applications or about the medical school application process in general, either comment down below or send me an email. My email is in the description box. As always, please like this video if you learned anything at all from what I said, and please subscribe to my channel so you can find out more tips and tricks about the medical school application process. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.